try to control too much. So I think, one of the parents was talking about, my child only wants to eat meat and takes everything else off the plate and only eats the meat. As frustrating as that may be, I would try to continue to encourage eating other foods, but know that that phase will probably end. And they're probably getting nutrition from other places, and hopefully that phase will end, but trying to control it more usually is not super helpful, because your kid wants to control, and maybe the one thing they feel like they can control right now is whether or not they eat something that you put in front of them. Okay, so I think Alexandra was our only one with a newborn. I think most people know, kind of what is recommended for newborns. But typically we're talking about breast milk and formula and introducing solid foods around 4 to 6 months. And CDL is real helpful in kind of going through that process with your kids. One of the important things to do that not as many people know about is to make sure you're getting as much variety as you can and to introduce those major food allergens. So previously, the guidance was to kind of delay introduction of things like peanuts and tree nuts and soy. And now we are trying to encourage people to introduce those earlier, because we actually see that when introduced earlier, kids are less likely, to develop those specific allergies. So did anybody say that they have a kid that's under 1 year in this group right now? Okay. Oh, I see one hand raised. Okay, so in that case, you want to be thinking about trying to add variety. You're usually cycling in foods every couple of days. And then we're trying to modify texture. So I think Elizabeth was saying, she's still on some of the softer stuff. And over time, you do want to progress to heartier textures, more lumpy textures, and some of those softer foods. And here's where you can also start mixing in different flavors to try to encourage new flavors. So if your child likes banana, you can add in a little bit of avocado. Or if your child likes yogurt, you can add in some fruits in there and try to encourage new textures and new tastes. And it is important to advance those textures, because we want kids to accept those new textures. And if we wait too long and we only feed them the soft stuff, it can make it a little harder to later advance. So it's really important to expose and to try to offer new foods, but also knowing that you want to not offer too many new things at once, because one, that can overwhelm the child, but also you want to make sure that if the child has a reaction to something, you know what the culprit was. So we usually try to encourage a new food like every 3 days or so.
Hey, Allie, you have one question. It looks like it's related to this. How do you introduce nuts, nut butter only? Alexandra just asked that.
Yeah, so the cool thing about nuts and now is that you've got a lot of these powdered, you have like powdered peanut butter and powdered almond butter. And those can be great ways to introduce nuts to your kids, because you can stir them into yogurt, you can stir them into applesauce, you can mix them with banana. And so they're great ways to give the child a developmentally appropriate exposure to nuts, because obviously nuts would be a choking hazard at this point. You can also use nut butters. They're very sticky. So you want to be careful about those early on, because those can be a choking hazard. So you either want to thin it with breast milk or formula, or combine it mixed in with yogurt or applesauce or some other moist baby food, so that you're not having a choking hazard. But those powders can be really helpful too, because most of them, and if you look at the label, most of them are just like ground peanuts or ground almonds. Those can be a great way to stir into softer foods. Okay, so next we get to the sort of the toddler stage, and that's when you come off of the breast milk or the formula and then go to whole milk. And note that it is whole milk, and that's because babies need this fat for brain development. Their brains are growing so fast, and we know that they tend to be picky at this time. They're trying to get in new foods, they're trying to learn about different foods, and we know that that milk is going to have a good source of nutrition for them, and especially the fat. We are not worried at 1 to 2 for the most part. There are exceptions, but for the most part, about kids getting too much fat because their brain is just using it up on a daily basis. And milk is a pretty big powerhouse of nutrition. Milk has gotten cow's milk has gotten a bad rap, but it does have, protein, magnesium, potassium, vitamin D, calcium. And it is a very well-rounded food. So in this stage, when your kid has not gotten into all different types of foods, or maybe you're advancing foods slowly, that milk can be a very important source of nutrition. But this is where they're learning to love food. You're setting up good habits that they want to play with their food. I find that we're constantly saying Alex, please don't stick your hand in your bowl of cereal or your yogurt, or stop putting in your hair. And all of those things are exhausting. But I have to remind myself that that is part of the learning to eat process, is the touching, the squeezing, the squashing, the putting in your mouth and spitting it out, and putting it in your mouth and chewing it and then spitting it back out. I mean, that is all part of the developmental process. So it's very hard as a parent to sit back. I hope most of you have dogs or pets or somebody that will clean up after your children, because that can be helpful and minimize the amount of cleanup that you have to do. But try your best to chill and let some of that happen, because that all is part of that learning process. The amount of food that you give a child at a particular eating occasion, we usually say about a tablespoon per year of life to start with. So if you're thinking about a plate and you want to do some vegetables, you would do about a tablespoon of green beans or a tablespoon of applesauce for a 1-year-old. You would do 2 of each for a 2-year-old. And it's just a starting place. They can have more, they can choose not to eat it, but that just kind of gives us an idea of about where they should be. And so your job again is to put that food on the plate, to encourage them, ooh, these green beans taste really good. Have you tried them? Oh, I really love baked chicken. Is to model that behavior and to provide that encouragement, but to allow your child to determine how much they're going to eat that day. And some days that's more successful than others, and kids throw stuff on the floor. Let's see. So any questions about sort of the toddler, and I'll get to some of the picky stuff here in a few. Just kind of want to lay down some of the basics for you. And then 2 to 5-year-olds is where we're really looking like adults. That's where we move into the low fat and the reduced fat, low fat and skim milk, because we don't need as much of that fat because our brain development has slowed just a little bit, and we're getting fat from other places in our diet. But you can see here approximately how much of each food group 2, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds need. And I'm going to give you guys these handouts so that you can have those. But sometimes people say, oh, my child doesn't eat enough meat, or they don't eat enough protein. And then they look at this and they go, oh, well, they really only need 2 ounces throughout the whole day. So actually they're doing okay. Or they're not eating enough vegetables. Well, really it's about a cup throughout the whole day. So if they're getting in about that cup, then they're doing okay. And so I think we tend to think about as adults, oh gosh, we need so much, and their bodies are growing fast, but it's not as much as maybe we kind of immediately think of. So, and you can see over here, this is an older handout, but I really like it. And the amounts have not changed in the most recent dietary guidelines, but you can see as some examples of different things that can count in there. So when you think about a cup of vegetables, when we're talking about cooked vegetables, it's a cup, but when we're talking about leafy green vegetables, it's about 2 cups. Now, not many toddlers are eating leafy greens very well. When we talk about fruits, what equals a half a cup of fruit is actually a 1/4 cup of dried fruit, right? So when it comes to dried fruit, they don't need quite as much in one serving. And Alexandra, that was one of the things I was going to ask you if you've been doing for snacks, is some of the dried fruits and cereal mixes, but boxes of raisins, prunes, apricots with no additional added stuff.
But wouldn't he only be able to eat very little of it since they're so sugary? And
so with regard to dried fruits, you want to look for the ones that don't have any added sugar. And so long as they don't have any added sugar, they're coming with a powerhouse of other good nutrients like magnesium, potassium, vitamin C, vitamin A. So I don't really worry too much about fruit as a source of sugar. I worry about the sugar that gets added to other foods and drinks. Now, certainly you don't want your kid eating nothing but fruit all day long, but I do think that can make a really good snack. So just look for things that don't have added sugar. And like with raisins, you can buy big boxes or you can buy little boxes. So you could start with the little boxes if you want to do a little bit less.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Allie, we've had a question come in about toddlers.
Yes.
Lydia asked, if a toddler is eating very, very little each day, is whole milk okay, or should we still only offer low-fat milk?
Yeah, I think part of that depends on how your child is tracking on the growth chart, right? So if your child is just small and just doesn't have a huge appetite, but is still growing well and is tracking on the growth chart, then it's okay to switch to low fat. But the reason we switch from whole to low fat is that most people and most children, as they move into the toddler stages, their diet is becoming more varied and they're getting fat from other sources. So if your child is eating very, very little and is not getting fat from other sources, then whole milk is just fine. If you feel more comfortable sticking on the whole milk for a little while longer, that is okay. Probably in the center, you would need, I don't know if you'd need a doctor's note for that, because they're bound by some of those rules and where they switch all the kids over. I know when I worked in school nutrition, sometimes we needed a doctor's note for certain substitutions. But yeah, so it would be totally fine to keep your kid on whole milk if you're, have other concerns about where their calories are coming from. Okay. So we all think we have picky eaters, and some of us do have picky eaters. I don't want to say nobody has a picky eater, but they're all picky. Like they're all picky at this age, and they're all picky to different extents and at different times. Siobhan's probably laughing too, because my daughter Isla would just like shovel food in her face as a little kid. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Siobhan, she's eating way too much. And now I'm in a place where I'm like, really, you're not gonna eat anything? Like you don't want any of that today? And so they definitely go through phases, and they go through phases in what they're exploring with regard to taste, texture, smells, and colors. And sometimes they're freaked out by colors, and sometimes they're freaked out by textures, and that changes over time. They're trying to exert that control and independence. So while we may think it's all about food, it's actually just this is the only thing that I can control today. That my mom can't force, she literally cannot force food down my throat. And so today I'm going to exert my control over this. And that drives me absolutely crazy as a rather controlling person myself. But I try to recognize it and let it go. I see a lot of distracted kids. Like the world is really exciting. And it's not that your kid is like starving or a picky eater, but it's like there's so much else they could be doing. They just want to go play. And with those children, again, so long as they're like tracking on their growth chart, I try not to worry about them too much, because it's very hard for a human to starve themselves. Like we are biologically programmed to eat what we need. And so it's going to be very rare to have a kid that's like so distracted that they're not going to at least eat what their body needs, right? They may not be eating as much as you think they need, but hopefully they're eating what their body needs. And don't underestimate what's going on in the mouth, right? So we know that there's teething that's going on, and it goes on for a long time. Or if they're experiencing any other discomfort. So maybe, making sure that you're checking in with your kids, are your teeth feeling okay? When they're old enough to tell you that, are your teeth feeling okay? Do you have, is your stomach feeling all right? I think it's important to ask kids those questions as well.
Alexandra just asked, is there too much food for a toddler?
So, I mean, I think you probably know your kid. And I think what's important is, sorry, my phone's ringing off the hook all of a sudden, is to have your child start to learn to check in with themselves, and you encourage that. So, and Alexandra, you and I were in the same boat in a few of those classes, like Isla, my daughter, would sit at the table and eat and munch and chat all day long. And she gets that from me. And so I'm always trying to say to her, all right, how does your tummy feel? Do you want to wait a minute and then we'll get another portion in a few minutes? Like assure them that it is okay, that they can have more. But let's wait a minute and we're all going to talk for a minute and then we'll all get some more in a little bit. So I think we have to walk a fine line because, we don't want kids to feel, and I don't want adults to feel like ashamed about how much they eat. And, if they're hungry, little ones especially usually know when their body's hungry, but helping them to learn to cue in to those hunger and fullness sensations, I do think is important. So, maybe having them stop and say, how's your tummy feeling? Do you feel full in your tummy, or do you feel like your tummy's still growling? I think those can be helpful. Or distraction, like, let's talk about something else. Do you want to play a game? We play the name game in our tape, or I Spy a lot. So sometimes just kind of redirecting for a few minutes and then they will go on to the next thing. But it is, if you are serving, and I just, and having known you in other classes, if you're serving healthy foods in what are reasonable portions, then I think it's probably unlikely that he's getting too much food. And I would just encourage lots of activity as well. And know that they go through stages and body shapes and they change over time.
Oh, he's tiny. That's the thing that surprises me. He's
very
slim. But basically there's always room, especially if it's fruit. There's always room. I'm done with lasagna, but maybe apple.
Yeah. And that's that preference for sweet taste. I mean, we all definitely have it. And I think it is okay to say, you know what, we've had enough fruit today. If you're still hungry, you can have some more lasagna. But if you're not, then we're all done. And, that also helps them distinguish, like, am I really hungry still, or did I just want that other sweet thing? So again, and that's where that like kind of research and practicality sort of collide a little bit, is that I think you have to use your parental intuition to say, like, kiddo, I know that you have had a lot of pieces you've had a lot of potatoes, and like, you really don't need any more potatoes today. If you're still hungry, I've got some more green beans. If you're done, we're good. So I would say trust yourself definitely as a parent. Okay. So just to go over a few like common picky eating behaviors, it is very common for kids to like one food one day and then hate it the next. To go on food jags and only eat one thing. So Maggie, I think this is what you were talking about with your son who only wants to eat meat right now. And I would call that a food jag. And that is a developmental thing. It's sometimes helpful when we can give it a name, right? And it's kind of scary because you know that they need more nutrition than what they're getting. But I will say it probably will work itself out over time. Sometimes it's a couple of days, sometimes it's a couple of weeks, sometimes it's a couple of months. But I would just say, if you are truly concerned, definitely go to your physician and talk to them and, make sure that all other growth signs and all other health signs look good. And this is also where I would say, I mean, people are pretty split on multivitamins, right? But once your child reaches 2, they can take like a multivitamin. And so I think of multivitamins as sort of like an insurance policy. It's not like it's necessary for if you're eating all of the food groups, but I know most kids go through these food jags. They go on different times when they eat more of something and less of something else. So they're just generally more picky. And so sometimes that multivitamin can just be like an insurance policy for you as a parent. You just know that they're getting at least minimum of some of those essential nutrients. If today they're just really not into vegetables, or they're really not into getting those healthy whole grains. And it's not going to replace the healthy foods, but in those time periods where they are not eating well, that can make you feel a little better as a parent that they might be getting some of those essential nutrition. And then things related to texture and color are totally normal. This week, I don't want to eat anything red. Next week, I don't want to eat anything, that's real smooth or chunky. I hate mushrooms because of the way they taste in my mouth. So those are common.
Sarah wants to know if you have a particular multivitamin that you recommend.
So I don't. The supplement industry, and Sarah, I think you know a little bit about this, but like the supplement industry is kind of a mess. in that the way it's regulated is very different than, for example, medications, because medications are regulated to where they have to do a study and show you that it's effective and it's safe and all of these things before it ever gets on the shelf. Supplements are not that way, but there is a federal oversight program for them. So I usually tell people with regard to supplements is to choose either a reputable brand that has been out there for a really long time, because if it's been out there for a really long time, then it is likely that they have not had any of those real problematic behaviors with the FDA, or have had a lot of like lawsuits and stuff against them. So when I talk about adults, I think about like Centrum and One A Day and some of those that have been out there for a long time. You can also look for different seals, like the United States Pharmacopoeia, so USP is Nature Made, has that USP sticker on it. So you can look for those, or those stickers for the USP certified, because that means a third party has come in and looked at their facility and tested their products. But even, I know some of you are going to go, no. But even just like the Flintstone vitamins that have been around for forever, you know, they've been tried and true and haven't had any major adverse issues or problems with contamination or anything like that. So I would just pick a reputable brand. I wouldn't worry so much about organic. I know a lot of people like the gummy stuff. I will tell you that the gummy ones are very hard to get iron in, and iron is a nutrient of concern for young kids. So if you can do something that's not a gummy, that's usually best. Plus the gummies are kind of like candy, and you know, that presents its own challenges. But if that's the only thing you can get your kid to eat, and the only thing your kid will eat right now is meat, then give them the gummy and just get through this time, because it's stressful enough being a parent. Okay, so we've had a lot of good discussion. So I want to just pull this back for just a second and make sure that I hit on a couple of, well, I didn't realize that one's next. So let's do that one. So, and one of the questions that I got beforehand was, you know, some of you may have heard of the Ellen Sattler Institute, and she's a person that has had a lot of years of practice in working with people and children on feeding. And the idea is that, again, the parent's job is what and when you try to plan for a positive eating experience. And I think that's really huge too. And we haven't talked about that. We talked about the importance of sitting down and modeling, but actually trying to make the eating experience positive, I think, is really important, because you want your kid to have a good time at the dinner table. And if the dinner table always feels stressful, it's probably only going to compound the eating issues. And so just, you know, try to make it as positive as possible. I'm going to share with you a handout that has tips for, like, you want to say it this way, like, oh, why won't you eat your green beans? But what a better way to say it is, oh, wow, these green beans are green like Hulk and they taste delicious. And, you know, so thinking about just ways to rephrase and provide with patience, offer. I mean, there's research that says it can take kids up to 30 times of being presented with something before they'll actually accept it. And then your kid's job is, you know, to choose to eat or not. And I say or not because there are going to be times when they probably just aren't going to eat, and to try to trust your kiddo that their little body is telling them, their little body knows better their hunger fullness than most of us do as adults. And they choose, you know, what to eat from what you provide and how much. All right, so looking that we have about 10 minutes left, and I will just send you guys these slides because there's a lot of like tips within them as well. These are some of the handouts that I'm going to send you with. I just want to go through a few tips on each of the food groups on how to try to get a little more in if that's an area that you're struggling in. So protein, one of the things I see a lot of times is kids don't like the texture. So a lot of times ground meats are more acceptable to children. So think about like making, you know, burgers and meatballs, but those don't have to always be ground beef. You know, they can be ground turkey, they can be ground chicken. You can mix in ground soy if you like them to be some vegetarian. And you can mix baby food in with them. So like we would buy baby food carrots sometimes to kind of use as to add some moisture. And that could be another way to sneak some veggies in there too. Let's see. And putting things that are unfamiliar with things that are familiar. So sometimes the best way to eat a get a kid to eat a vegetable is to put it on a pizza, right? So getting something that they, that they like, and say, okay, we're gonna have pizza tonight, but we're all gonna take a bite at least with one veggie on it, and then move on from there if they don't like it. Edamame is a really good, fun protein for lots of kids. That soy protein is one of the most complete vegetable sources of protein. And so a lot of kids like to play with edamame, and you can also mash that if your kid is not quite to the point of having, individual pieces of edamame. Let's see. Trying to stir peanut butter into oatmeal or yogurt can also be a way to add calories and fat if you're worried that your kid is not eating enough, and to add additional protein. And then just think about the way we're cooking. I know as parents, it's kind of exhausting to try to think about being more creative at the dinner table, but sometimes it's a matter of how it's presented or how the texture comes out. So, while as adults, we might be trying to think of everything as grilled and not breaded, doing a little bit of a whole grain panko crust or something like that might be a way to get your kid to eat a little bit more of those protein foods. Or if you're doing like chicken or fish and your kid really likes fruit, maybe trying like a pineapple or a mango like salsa on top. So something that's got a little bit of sweetness that helps them sort of initially accept that food. And then, doing themes like Taco Tuesday night, and like this week we're doing fish tacos. Next week we're doing bean tacos. The next week we're doing chicken tacos, and letting your kids pick and choose and help you with that menu planning as well can be really helpful, because it can add in that element of control. Okay. Veggies, I'm going to go straight to, should I hide them or not? Because some people are like, well, if I hide them, then they're never going to learn to like them. But if I don't hide them, then they're never going to eat them. And I would just say do a little bit of both. Okay. Hide them a little bit to get kids to eat more veggies, whether that's adding it to, a meatloaf, or to your pizza, or to your scrambled eggs, or soups, or, don't hide them all the time, because they need to be introduced to them and to learn to accept those new foods. And if they become keen on the fact that you're trying to hide their vegetables all the time, sometimes that can really backfire, and then they get really mad. So I would say try to introduce some vegetables standalone, and also think about trying to maybe hide them where you can. Let's see. Whole grains, I feel like people don't struggle with quite as much from the parents that I have seen recently, just because there's more on the market there for whole grains. But just remember to look for whole grains in the foods that you choose. Trying brown rice instead of white rice, and whole wheat crackers instead of just, the white crackers, oatmeal as a whole grain, and trying different varieties and textures. So lots of people have questions about snacking. We try to say more, 2 or more food groups, just to try to get some balance in there for kids. Kids love snacks. It can be like super annoying. Some days I just feel like all you've done is ask me for snacks like all day long, and I'm tired of making snacks. But snacks can be really good ways to sneak in nutrition. But you do want to make sure that you allow enough time between snacks and meals. So that is somewhere where I see parents struggle, because kids snack, and then we're not hungry for dinner. So I think you have to use your intuition as a parent of when we need to stop, so that we're still hungry for dinner. I mean, it is clear to me when my kid comes home from ASP as to whether or not she ate multiple snacks that day, because usually on the day she eats multiple snacks, she does not eat dinner. But you can try for, use those snacks to get in nutrition. A lot of times we pick easy stuff, which is, the easier route. But if we know your kid is a big snacker and doesn't do well at meals, you'll definitely want to think about the quality of those. So let's see, do I have them on this one? No, I've got a snack tips for you, but string cheese, fresh fruits, brown rice cakes with peanut butter, and a fruit topping are always a good one. Anytime you can put a smiley face on it or something with some raisins is always a good one. Veggies with hummus or dips, making your own like yogurt dips, or even just using like a little bit of ranch and just thin it out, so that they can't just have like gobs and gobs and gobs of it with everything. But sometimes those dips and those vehicles are essential for getting the kid to try and accept, and just, teach them what a condiment is. I had to tell my kid the other day, we don't drink the dressing out of the bowl. It's just made to flavor the salad a little bit. And water with snacks as much as possible as they get older, because filling up on milk can be a challenge too. If your kid is drinking just like so much milk, they're probably not going to be hungry. So you can play around with how much milk they get and how much water, and see if that helps you at all at meals. And so my final words, and then we'll have questions, but is just, just keep trying. Like, being a parent is exhausting. Being a parent trying to get a kid to eat healthy is exhausting. But really the best tool you have in your toolbox is patience, because it really does take kids like a really long time to accept foods. And some kids, just like they take longer to accept a social situation or a change than other kids, they may take longer to accept a new food than another kid. You can see Isla, she was my little chunker for so long, and now she's like, and I thought this picture was funny because she's like wearing a pink tank top in both, and she probably picked it in both, but she's just like slim and she's super strong, and she's giving me the same grief that every other parent was complaining about before. And then my little guy on the bottom is a pretty good eater, although he's definitely got a few of his things that he doesn't like. But I try as much as I can to be a good role model, try to be positive at the dinner table. It does not always go well, but we do the best that we can. And the most important thing is that you care about your kid. Every one of you is doing a good job because you're here and you care. So just remember that is the most important thing. And at the end of the day, like, it will all be okay. Like, you're here, you're asking questions, you're looking for good information. It will all be okay. So that's from another presentation, but I want to make sure I address some of these questions. Let me check the chat box real quick in case anything came. Is my child? Does any child need it? Vitamins? Is that what you're asking, Alexandra? Does any child need vitamins? I think it just depends. Like, when you've got a child that's really, really, really picky, and is going on these really long food jags, I do think that having that multivitamin can be helpful. If your child is eating well, no, it is not necessary. We can get our nutrition from food. But I've definitely seen some kids where it can be helpful. And for specific nutrients of concern, like iron, when you get a kid with low iron status, they need it. Or if a child like won't accept, milk, and they need calcium because they can't get it from other nutrients as well. So I'm looking back at my list of questions and things that you guys brought up. And while I look over it, let me see, does anybody have a question that I did not get a chance to even touch on that you would like to ask?
Can I ask something?
Yes, please.
Hi, sorry, I had to switch to my phone.
You're good.
So if a child isn't, is being picky and is not eating, but is obviously hungry, so they're asking for milk and probably asking more than, they would typically have. Is there any time where you should limit that and say, well, no, I can't give you like 3 cups of milk today? Or, I mean, is it better to send them to bed hungry or what? Thank you.
So Lydia, I'm going to tell you, don't starve your child, right? But
Right.
I have definitely given parents, like, I guess, permission to try that with their kids who are milk all the time and won't eat food. Is to say, all right, say that they can have 1 cup of milk and then we're going to go into water, because most kids don't need more than like about 2 to 2.5 cups of milk a day once they become, toddlers. And so withhold it a little bit and see if that does encourage them to eat solid food, because sometimes milk can be the problem.
Okay. And if they do, they're okay with switching to water. I'm saying like either milk or water. They're okay with either as long as it's not food. But yeah.
So he's just drinking all the time is what you're saying, and not eating.
Yep.
That's a challenge. Are there any foods that that he likes that he will accept?
I mean, I don't want to get into, I don't want to take up too much of your time if it doesn't apply to anyone else, but sure, some days, I mean, we never know. Some days he might
never know. So it's quite variable.
Some days it might be broccoli, some days it might be banana, sometimes it's only cookies. We don't know. Every day is out. Yep.
Every day is different. So your kid likes food, just maybe not the same food every day, and it might change from meal to meal. Yeah, I mean, water is not going to stifle the hunger fullness signals. I mean, it will a little bit. Like we tell people to drink a glass of water before you eat to try to help you fill up, but like their body is still going to be driven to eat food if they need nutrition. So I would say don't worry too much about him drinking too much water, but I would try to cut back on the milk a little bit and see if that helps him, be hungry and eat food. And I don't like the idea of sending kids to bed hungry, but sometimes it is more behavior. It's like explaining to them, like, no, this is dinner and this is what's offered to you. And especially if there's something on that plate that your kid will like.
I have a question if we have time. So I'm currently struggling because throughout the pandemic, we've gotten into not as good eating habits ourselves, which then translated to our daughter. And we had a nanny for a while who was not feeding her the way that I would have liked to, and all sorts of things. So she's definitely doing a lot of the, she loves carbs, meat, and dairy. Those are the things that she likes to eat, and she'll eat tons of them. And I guess I'm trying to, I try to follow the, you provide, they decide, and the whole try to give one thing that they like at each meal. But when it comes down to it, like the things that she really likes are the, carbs and dairy, and I can get her to eat some vegetables, but if I make like lentil soup or something, I don't want to then have to provide her with chicken nuggets with it, because then she's just going to eat the chicken nuggets, so maybe some more guidance there, I guess, on the, like, if you're coming out of some bad eating habits, how do you transition? How do you get to switching back?
And Sarah, I'm glad that you brought up the whole, like, provide something they like with something that's new. And I do think that that's important. I would think that, like, so for your example of like lentil soup, right, that's the protein source that night. So, and rather than supplementing it with chicken nuggets, I would pick a vegetable that, she likes, which might, encourage her to eat a little bit more of the lentil soup. How old is your child, Sarah?
She's 3.
Yeah. So I hear you. I love carbs and fruit and milk, and I do not want to eat the vegetables. And I would say, the other thing is if where you can and where you're comfortable with it, have her help you select some meals for the week, including some of those vegetables. If you're comfortable taking her to the grocery store, that can also be helpful, because it does give them that element of control. And I think you also asked about, like, you feel like you're doing the same thing all the time, because you're catering to their likes. And I think do as much of that as you can, and then add in some new things, because you do want to capitalize on the fact that she does eat broccoli. Like, yes, keep serving it, but don't serve broccoli, only broccoli, try something else mixed in there. But I hear you, it's challenging.
Okay, thank you. That helps of thinking about the balance of the meal as well. But I do just imagine that if I serve anything with chicken nuggets, she's just gonna eat chicken nuggets. So.
Yeah, and sometimes you got to just like take the chicken nuggets out for a few meals or something, and it results in tears, but they rebound. They rebound so fast. I'm always amazed.
She loves eggs and any other kind of meat, so it doesn't have to be that, but yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I have a question.
Yes.
So I feel like the border of fruits and vegetables sometimes is unclear. Like I would consider tomato is one of them, for example.
Oh yeah. So so do you just want to know what the difference is, or do you mean?
So if the kids, no, if the kids just eat like more fruit and then the vegetables, but it end up to be more than 2 cups, adding them together, even if the vegetable is not as much as 1 cup, is that okay? Or?
Yeah, that's okay. I would say that's probably most kids.
Yeah, feel like that way.
Yeah, it's much harder to get the kids to eat vegetables usually than fruits. I mean, they're just not as sweet. So yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about those numbers. I would just keep encouraging, keep offering, and yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about that. And then the borderline between like fruit and vegetable, sometimes it has to do with, are we talking about, horticulture, botany, or the plant origin, or are we talking about how it's used in culinary practices? And so
Yeah,
a tomato, for
it's
example.
very clear. It's unclear. So.
Yeah. And some of them are kind of in between on the nutritional content too. Like a tomato is going to have a little bit more carbohydrate to it than some of the other vegetables, but not as much as a fruit. So
yeah, also like I feel like if I put a little bit of sugar on the tomato, he'll eat it like happily. So
okay.
It's a balance for eating vegetables.
Yeah. I would, I think here and there is probably okay, but I would try to encourage without as possible.
And he also likes to eat the things that's most difficult to get from the market here, like lotus.
Ooh.
Roasted duck, for example.
Oh, okay. Do we have any good Asian groceries here?
Just comments. So
yeah,
we do have lotus, but he just having developed this weird taste for lotus and radish. Weird.
Interesting. We get really good all kinds of
here.
radishes at the Athens Farmers Market when it's in season. They do lots of really good different types of radish. Yeah. Sounds like you may need to make some trips to the DeKalb Farmers Market and load up and buy an extra.
Oh, I do. There is a Orient Mart here, but I just feel he's very weird about what he likes. He will eat vegetables, but lotus will be one of them. So.
Interesting. Well, I would say just keep trying. I know they'll reject it. And it sounds like he's a good eater at home. So
he's fine at home, but he's very easy. Like a bowl of pasta would be good, but he would just not develop the taste for the daycare food.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, sometimes it's going to be that unfamiliarity or just like, this is not as much what I like to eat. It doesn't match at home. And as long as he's tracking on weight, I would try your best. I'm not going to say wouldn't. I would try your best.
Trying.
It's so hard.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Ms. Patel, I will try to look for some information to share with you as well on the vegetarian diet and some other tips, because I know I do have some handouts on that. And so I will send those to Siobhan afterwards and she can share them out.
Yep, I can definitely do that. All right, does anybody have any more questions before we wrap up? Don't want anybody to be late going to pick up their kiddos.
Siobhan's like, turn off your computer and go get your children. No.
But thank you guys so much for coming. And thank you, Allie. That was wonderful.
Yeah.
And I know that that's going to be very helpful to a lot of people. So
I'm happy to do follow-up questions. So if any of you guys have anything else burning that you want to email me about, feel free.
Yeah. And if anybody has any more questions, you can just email me and I can send them to Allie. So, all right. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.